So for evidence number 4, this is a pretty hefty one. We're going to be looking at bone structures of organisms. And we're going to start off here with the homologous structures. And remember that that prefix, homo, means to be like the same. And so these are going to be, they're basically similar structures. So I always think of this as similar structure, similar function. And it's not same structure, same function, right? It's similar. And that's because they have been inherited by different organisms, but from a common ancestor. This is the result of what we call divergent evolution. I'll go into more detail on that in just a second. But this divergent is due to adaptation. So one of the examples is the pentadactyl limb. And you can see that here in this description. And pentadactyl, remember that pent means 5, and dactyl is going to be fingers. So these are the 5-fingered limbs of different organisms. I was saying the pentadactyl limb. This is the limb. These are the limb bones. That are common to all tetrapods. And when I say that word tetrapod, I'm talking about 4-limb vertebrates, right? So anything that has 4 limbs and is a vertebrate. Put that there too, because that's important. So 4-limb vertebrates. Anyway, in the pentadactyl limb, what we are going to see, zoom in so we can get a little, we're going to see a single bone that is proximal to the body. This is, I mean, it doesn't, you don't need to know the names, but this is the humerus. Right? And then you are going to have 1 of 2 of the distal bones. And that's going to be like the radius. And then the second of these bones, so then this 2 of 2 of distal bones. Is going to be the ulna, right? And again, the names of the bones are not necessarily required. But then you also are going to have the group of bones in the wrists. These are the carpals. And then you're also going to have a series of bones in digits. And let's look at this here. You can see the picture down below. So the digits are going to be those metacarpals and the phalanges. So if I look here, right, I can color code this image and I can begin to get an idea of how these bones match up. Right, so here I am going to see the whale, surprising, right? It's going to have a similar bone as the frog, is going to have a similar bone as the horse, it's going to have one like the lion, the human, the bat, and the bird, right? So that's going to be our humerus. And then you're going to, we can color code it here too. We can look at the whale as the matching one here. The frog one is a little bit different. It's kind of converged into one. And then same with the horse, but you can still see there's these like separations here. So you're either going to get one of the two or you're going to get both. But notice the lion, I'm coloring it in here. The human, the bat, and then of course you've got your bird, right? Now notice these aren't the same, but they're similar. Let's keep color coding that. Let's go ahead here to purple. So over here on the whale, right? Notice you kind of had that differentiation down here. There's that differentiation. They're not separate. They got those similar structures and functions. Same thing here on the lion, the human, the bat, and the bird, if we color coordinate those. Notice they've got these similar bones. Now, we can look at it here, that we have the carpals in all of these organisms. Carpals. Carpals in the frog, carpals in the horse, lion, human, bat, and these small ones here at the bird. And finally, we're going to have our digits, right? The metacarpals and the phalanges. So each of these all have some form of a digit. And so that's going to match up our homologous structures for the pentadactyl organisms. And so even though these have very different functions, right? Like these each, for the whale and the frog, these aren't used for walking, right? These are fins for swimming. Or in the horse, the lion, and the human, these are all going to be for walking or running. And then in the bird and the bat, you're going to see that these are for flight. Very similar structures, different functions, but still, this is all for locomotion. So even though they are all similar structures, right? They're all in that similar, not the same, but similar function of movement. Okay? And so we might expect with all of these different functions that they came from a different ancestor, but likely because they have these similar bone structures, it's likely that they came from that common ancestor. So if we look down here, I was talking earlier up here about divergent and convergent evolution. And so divergent evolution is when you start with one parent species. So this is just single parent. And so these single parent species over time, they are going to evolve into a number of different species. And this ultimately gives us those homologous structures. So divergent evolution results in homologous structures over time. Give you some examples of those in just a second. We also call divergent evolution, you can hear it also as adaptive radiation. And so adaptive radiation makes sense because it's an organism, it's a species that's adapting to its environment and then making those changes outward. And so an example of this is a lab we're going to do, which is Darwin's finches, that they started off as a common ancestor, and we have evidence to support that. But as their environments changed and they went into different niches, right, which we learned about in the ecological sections, they needed different types of beaks to be able to get different food. And so this guy, he was able to eat fruit, and this one could eat grubs, and use a tool and eat insects and leaves. And so they all have beaks that have similar structures, and similar functions, right? And then the convergent evolution, right? Got an image here where it's a couple of different parent species that through time, right, these multiple parent species over time with similar environmental conditions evolve similar traits, so they become more similar. However, since they have different parent species, you're not going to get those same bone structures. So analogous structures, so this convergent evolution results in this analogous structure, and that's going to be different origins. So it's going to have a different structure. Similar function now. The example of the shark, the ichthyosaur, the dolphin, the penguins, they all needed to evolve some form of fin, but when you look at their bones of the fins and how they use them, it's very different. So the last form of homology that we're going to look at in evidence number 4 is going to be molecular, and these are protein and DNA sequences. For the sake of time, I'm going to real quick write some of these things out, and then I'm going to describe them. I just want to finish up here with molecular homologies, and these are going to be homologous protein and DNA sequences. So it really does start to make sense. I'm going to jump down here to this tree of life for a second, and notice that whenever we have a branching point here or a node, this is going to be representative of a common ancestor. We're going to investigate this much more, I promise. But notice that whenever you have the same identical DNA sequence, there has been less time for accumulation of mutations, and so these guys are closely related, right? And so we're going to put them close to each other on this tree. However, this one here, there is a difference, but still it's closer to these up here than it is to these down here. So that's why we put it on this branch. And then these are actually the exact same DNA sequence if you look at them, and so they are very closely related. They had less time between their divergence from whatever this common ancestor was. And then kind of same, you can follow the line down here, but really what it comes down to is that the more similar the sequence, the more closely related the species are. And that really means that the less time has passed for the sequence to acquire mutations and diverge from each other. The less similar the sequence means that the species are less closely related, and that just means that more time has passed for changes to accumulate, and that means it's a more distant common ancestor and they're less closely related. So this organism down here, whatever this species might be, is farther, way farther from the same DNA sequence as this one here, and that's indicated through these nodes here. Whatever the common ancestor was at this branch point separated and started to accumulate various DNA mutations. That'll wrap it up for evidence number 4. We'll move on to evidence number 5 in the next video.